Today marked my 33rd birthday. I woke up to the familiar aches of my chronic illness, a relentless presence since my childhood. As the CEO of a flourishing tech startup, I often buried these discomforts under a mountain of work and constant coffee, but today felt unusually oppressive. It pushed me to visit the private clinic, almost a second home to me, where I was well acquainted with the staff. Among them was Mason, the young nurse whose charm and ready smile made many patients, including myself, a bit smitten. He greeted me with a bright, "Happy birthday, Jennifer," as I entered, reminding me that I wasn't alone in my struggles. Despite my appreciation, I sighed, the complexities of my condition weighing on me as I settled onto the clinic bed. Mason, ever the optimist, busied himself with preparations, undeterred by my circumstances. "I don't care about your illness, Jennifer. I like you," he said, his sincerity clear. As he attended to the charts, I forced myself to focus on the brighter aspects of my life, my independence and achievements, though loneliness shadowed my successes. The day unfolded with routine tests and consultations. By late afternoon, ready to retreat to my solitude, Mason intervened with a birthday dinner invitation. Reluctantly, I agreed, setting the boundary of just as friends, to which he acquiesced, though his eyes sparkled with something more. Dinner with Mason broke the monotony of my daily routines. We chatted about everything but my health, movies, travel, food, making me feel wonderfully normal. Walking me to my car afterward, Mason reiterated his earlier offer to be there for me, his earnestness illuminated by the streetlights. The complexities of my life loomed large, yet here was Mason, ready to embrace all of it. "Let's take it slow," I suggested, not fully prepared to dive in but intrigued by the possibility of not facing life's challenges alone. As I drove home, his words lingered, and I considered that maybe, just maybe, I could allow myself the sliver of happiness. 5 months later, Mason and I had grown closer, each moment together soothing the persistent pain of my condition. Despite my reservations about our future, given my health, Mason remained steadfast. On a crisp autumn evening, as the city blazed with the hues of fall, Mason suggested a stroll through the park post-dinner. His next words, though slightly shaky, were simple and heartfelt, reflecting the genuine depth of his feelings. "I've been reflecting on our relationship and how genuinely happy you make me. I've come to realize that I want us to be together indefinitely." As Mason spoke these words, my heart skipped a beat. "Mason, are you certain about this? You know my health issues won't make things easier," I cautioned. Mason responded with conviction. "I know, and I'm ready for all of it. The good days, the tough days, and everything in between." He then pulled out a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a modest, yet stunning ring. "Jennifer, will you marry me?" he asked. His proposal took me by surprise. Although I loved him deeply, the idea of such a commitment had seemed beyond my reach due to my health complications. Yet, seeing him there, so certain about our future, my reservations began to melt away. "Yes, Mason, I'll marry you," I replied, and we embraced, momentarily shutting out the world around us. It felt perfectly right. The weeks that followed were filled with excitement and planning. We opted for a simple wedding, something intimate with close friends and family, including his sister and her husband. However, before diving into the celebratory preparations, I knew we needed to discuss some practical aspects of our future. One evening, I sat down with Mason and presented a prenuptial agreement I had prepared. "I need to talk about something practical, especially considering my business and health," I explained. Mason nodded understandingly. I handed him the documents. After scanning them briefly, he looked up and smiled. "If this makes you feel secure, I'm all for it. I'm not here for the money, Jennifer. I'm here for you," he said. "Are you sure?" I needed confirmation once more. "Absolutely," he assured me, signing the document without hesitation. "Now, can we get back to planning our little wedding?" "Yes, we can," I replied, a mix of relief and love washing over me. Mason's acceptance of the prenup reassured me about his intentions and commitment. Our wedding day was simple yet perfect. Held at City Hall with only our dearest present, It was everything we wanted. Standing there exchanging vows with Mason, I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps life was granting me a chance at something truly beautiful, despite the challenges. Life after our quaint wedding initially seemed nearly ideal. Mason took on managing our household, transforming our home into a haven of delicious aromas and impeccable tidiness. The honeymoon phase appeared to extend well beyond expectations. However, about a year later, subtle changes began to emerge. Mason's zest for household activities diminished, and he became somewhat reclusive. Initially, I attributed this to the natural adjustments of living together or the end of our extended honeymoon period. But the change was noticeable. One afternoon, I returned home early, eager to surprise him with news of a potential new client. Expecting to find him busy in the kitchen or doing chores, I instead found the house eerily silent. Confused, I walked towards the kitchen and stopped as I heard a voice, a cheerful, unfamiliar woman's voice. Pushing the door open, I found a middle-aged woman humming as she chopped vegetables. She looked up, startled. "Oh, you must be Jennifer. I'm Amy. Mason didn't mention you'd be home this early." She introduced herself. "Who exactly are you?" I asked, managing to keep my voice steady despite the surprise. "I'm the housekeeper. Mason hired me about a year ago. I come in a few times a week to clean up and cook. Makes things easier, you know?" She smiled, obviously oblivious to the shock she had just delivered. A housekeeper for a year, and I had no idea? A mix of anger and betrayal began to simmer within me, but I maintained my composure. "Right, I see. Thank you, Amy. Could you give us a moment, please?" "Of course," she said, wiping her hands and leaving the room. When Mason returned home, he found me in the living room, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. His face dropped as soon as he saw my expression. "Who's Amy, Mason?" I asked bluntly. Mason hesitated, then sighed. "She's the housekeeper." "Look, I meant to tell you, but I thought you'd be upset about me not doing the housework myself." "Upset, Mason? Do you think I'd be upset about who cleans or cooks?" "I'm upset because you lied because you thought this was something you had to hide," I said, my voice rising with each word. I know, and I'm sorry. It started small, and then I just didn't know how to bring it up without making it a big deal. It seemed easier to just keep it going," he explained, looking genuinely remorseful. "Easier for who, Mason?" "Because this doesn't feel easy for me," I shot back. We spent the night discussing it. He apologized, and I tried to see his perspective, but a small crack had formed between us, making me wonder what else he might be keeping from me. Things seemed to smooth over a bit after that night, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Mason continued to handle the dinner and keep the house in order, but now I knew he wasn't the one doing the work. It felt like our roles were defined. I worked and he managed the home, except he didn't manage it. He outsourced it. However, it wasn't just the hidden housekeeper issue that bothered me. Mason's behavior had changed. His late-night whispers on the phone, his newfound need for privacy, and his constant requests for more money, it all pointed to something more troubling. So, I did what any resourceful woman would do. I hired a private detective. It wasn't long before I had the results, and they weren't what I had hoped for. Mason was spending most of his days at a casino, and the amount of money he was losing was staggering. That evening, as Mason walked into the living room, I was waiting for him, the detective's report in hand. He tried to greet me with a kiss, but I stepped back, holding up the papers. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice cold and composed. Mason collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't mean for it to get this out of hand. It started as just a way to blow off some steam, but it got bigger and I didn't know how to stop." "And you thought the best way to handle it was to lie? To steal from me?" My voice rose, my temper flaring. "I'm sorry, Jennifer, so sorry. I need help. I want to quit, I swear. I need your help to get out of this mess," he pleaded, his voice desperate. I took a deep breath, seeking solace within myself. "Mason, I'll assist you this time, but it has to be the last. You need professional help for your addiction, and you must acknowledge the debt I'm clearing for you. It's $75,000. I explained, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Mason nodded, his expression one of sheer misery. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll get the help, he agreed. We made plans for his treatment to begin the next week, hoping this could Arthur a new start. However, just as a semblance of normalcy seemed possible, Mason blindsided me with an unthinkable suggestion. Jennifer, what if we have a baby? It might bring us closer, he proposed out of nowhere. I stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. A baby, Mason? You know that's not just risky. It could be fatal for me. He backpedaled quickly. I know. It was just a thought. Forget I mentioned it. Yet the idea lingered and kept surfacing. Even his sister, an obstetrician, phoned to press the issue. You should reconsider, Jennifer. Having a baby is natural. Don't be selfish, she urged. Her words angered me. You're a doctor. You understand my condition. How can you even suggest such a thing? I retorted, then ended the call, my heart pounding with fury. The ensuing months were filled with tension and unresolved conflicts that wore me down. Nothing, however, could have prepared me for what awaited when I returned home unexpectedly early one day, craving a quiet evening. Instead, I opened the door to find chaos. Boxes everywhere. Mason's sister Megan and her husband Arthur were moving their belongings into our living room. What the hell is going on here? I demanded, my voice slicing through the noise. Megan turned calmly. Oh, we're moving in, Jennifer. This is Mason's place, and you should start packing, she stated flatly. My gaze shot to Mason, looking for any sign of confusion or disagreement. There was none. He met my gaze with a cold, detached expression. Jennifer, I can't do this anymore. You've been manipulative and controlling. It's over, he declared. I was dumbfounded. Manipulating you, Mason? What are you talking about? You heard him, Arthur added sharply. Mason stepped forward, divorce papers in hand. I'm also seeking compensation for emotional abuse and alimony. I need to take care of myself now. The room spun as I took the papers, the words a blur of betrayal. But a surge of resolve washed over me. I laughed, a hollow sound. You're in for a surprise. But go ahead, think what you want. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Without another word, I went to our bedroom, packed essentials, and prepared to leave. There was no point in arguing. The man I had married was a stranger now. I drove away, heading to the elite cottage village where I owned a home, a sanctuary I had bought long before meeting Mason. As I passed the familiar gates, nodding at the guards, a sense of relief washed over me. The house was exactly as I had left it, spacious, quiet, and perfectly suited to my needs, a haven prepared for whatever the future might hold. That evening, I made calls to my closest friends, updating them on the situation and reassuring them of my well-being. I was feeling composed as my lawyer, and I prepared to discuss our approach. Mason's wild accusations would not go unanswered. A few days after I had settled into my peaceful haven, I was jolted by a frenzied phone call from Mason. His voice, tinged with panic and anger, filled the room. Jennifer, you've set me up. This is some twisted game to you, isn't it? With a serene smile, I responded calmly, Mason, if there's been a misunderstanding, why don't we discuss it in person? Come over and we can talk. I'll send you the address. Soon after, the gates of the village swung open, and Mason, along with Megan and her husband Arthur, drove in. From my window, I observed as they pulled up, their faces glued to the car windows, eyes wide at the sight of my expansive residence. As they approached my front door, their earlier confidence seemed to diminish. Opening the door, I had to cough to break the silence before greeting them with a wry smile. Well, what brings you to my humble abode? Regaining some of his earlier bravado, Mason blurted out, Your lawyer called me. He said I have to pay next month's rent for the apartment, $5000. You never told me it wasn't your apartment. You never asked, I replied with measured patience. And if you want to stay in that apartment, you'll need to pay the rent. Megan, ever the opportunist, chimed in, nudging Mason. And what about this place? It's gorgeous. Why don't you just give us this house instead of the apartment? Otherwise, we'll sue you for everything you've got." Their audacity was almost amusing. I burst into laughter. "You want to sue me for this house? Mason, dear, I bought this house long before you came into the picture. You have no claim over it whatsoever." Their faces flushed with frustration, and the shouting escalated. "You can't just kick us out. We have rights." Mason yelled. "That's where you're wrong," I countered, my voice firm as I picked up the phone. "Security, could you please escort these people out? They seem to be lost." Within minutes, village security arrived, and the trio was promptly shown out. Their indignant protests dwindled into the distance, leaving a serene quiet that enveloped the house like a soothing blanket. Once they had left, I sat back down, the laughter replaced by a weary sigh. It was evident that Mason and his sister were desperately trying to intimidate me into surrendering what was rightfully mine. I called my lawyer again, detailing the day's confrontations. "We need to be prepared for whatever they might try next," I told him, my tone resolute. "Don't worry, Jennifer. We can handle this. They have no legal standing," he reassured me. The day of the court hearing arrived with palpable tension. I walked into the courtroom, my lawyer by my side, ready to face whatever Mason and his family had concocted. The allegations were absurd. Mason claimed I had exploited him, turning him into what he melodramatically referred to as my slave. He recounted tales of endless chores and a thankless life under my supposed tyranny, while Megan and Arthur vigorously nodded, supporting his every word. I barely resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Fortunately, it was soon our turn to present the truth. My lawyer stood, adjusting his suit jacket with calm assurance. "Your Honor, we have evidence that contradicts every one of Mr. Mason's claims," he stated confidently. Then he turned to call our first witness, the au pair Mason had hired, who stepped forward to share her perspective. "I served as a housekeeper in Mr. Mason's home, handling all the domestic duties and preparing meals, while he rarely participated in any chores, according to my testimony and supported by employment documents and payroll records." These showed that Mason's claims of contributing to housework were exaggerated. During the court proceedings, my attorney brought forth our prenuptial agreement. This contract, which both of us had signed, clearly stated that in the event of our divorce, Mason would not be entitled to any financial support or property settlement. The courtroom fell silent as the implications of the agreement were understood. Mason paled when my lawyer questioned him, revealing that he had not fully read the document he signed, which primarily focused on my welfare. Moreover, my lawyer also presented evidence of Mason's gambling debts, which I had settled out of my pocket and for which Mason had signed an acknowledgement. As the judge made her ruling, granting the divorce and denying Mason any claims to alimony or compensation, a wave of relief swept over me. However, this feeling was short-lived. Outside the courtroom, Mason's sister Megan angrily scolded him, revealing their ulterior motives that included not only securing my wealth, but also my untimely demise. In the months following, I began rebuilding my life, focusing on my well-being and my business. One morning, while enjoying a coffee and reviewing business documents, Mason unexpectedly appeared at my house. He looked worn and desperate. I let him in, curious yet wary of his intentions. Upon facing me, he dropped to his knees, dramatically begging for forgiveness and pleading for a chance to return to my life, offering to do any household task if only I'd let him stay. I listened, unmoved by his display of regret. Mason tried to shift some blame to Megan, claiming it was her idea to drive their scheme forward. Despite his pleas, I stood firm, explaining that the real issue was not just about who concocted the plan or what exactly happened, but about the fundamental lack of trust that could not be easily restored. "You shattered our trust irreparably. Not only did you go along with Megan's plans, but you also fully knew the dangers her schemes posed to me." Mason scrambled to his feet, reaching out as though he could physically restore our once cherished relationship. "Jennifer, I'm lost without you. I've taken out a loan to repay the $75,000, and I've started working again. I'm trying to fix my mistakes," he said desperately. "But fixing your mistakes doesn't mean you can just undo the past and its consequences," I told him sharply. What you need to understand, Mason, is that you chose this path. Now, you must walk it alone. His face fell, and for a moment I almost felt pity for him, almost. But then, I recalled the cold, calculating discussions about my health and potential demise. I want you to leave now, I said firmly. And Mason, don't come back. You are not welcome here, not now, not ever. When he hesitated, still trying to gather words for another plea, I turned and signaled to the security personnel who had discreetly stayed nearby. They stepped forward, escorting him away as he called out my name, his cries fading into the distance. After he was gone, I stood at the doorway for a few moments, letting the stillness envelop me once more. This house, this life, I had built it, and I would not let anyone threaten it again. I returned to my morning routine, the disturbance now settling into a resolved chapter of my life. Looking ahead, my thoughts turned to future plans, dreams of travel, and meeting new people. The world was vast, and my heart, once weighed down by betrayal, now felt lighter, buoyed by the possibilities ahead.
Hi, my name is Peggy. I'm a 36-year-old mother of two, residing in Florida with my husband and our children, Jenny and Tristan. I always appreciate the position I'm in, particularly when it comes to creating a loving home for my family. Unfortunately, a persistent source of tension over the years has been the constant criticism from my in-laws regarding my parenting. My mother-in-law, Madison, and father-in-law, Ted, both in their late 70s, hold traditional views on parenting. They believe I'm too lenient with my kids and lack sufficient discipline. Their unsolicited advice on child rearing makes me feel like I'm not doing a good job, and it's become increasingly irritating. They often comment on my children's diet, expressing concerns about sugar consumption and predicting dire consequences. Their comments range from predicting dental issues to speculating about future hyperactivity due to sugar intake. Despite my assurance that my kids eat a balanced diet, the critiques persist. When faced with these criticisms, I found it challenging to address the issue directly, given that they are my in-laws. My silence, however, allowed their constant nitpicking to erode my resolve gradually. I felt increasingly overwhelmed, with their calls even serving as reminders of my perceived inadequacies as a mother. I confided in my understanding husband, sharing the toll these interactions were taking on my well-being. However, my struggle to confront my in-laws led me to silently endure their disapproval. I felt my sanity slip away with each passing day. I found myself in a state of helplessness, torn between acknowledging the challenges and recognizing that they were, after all, his parents. When I approached him formally regarding his parents' antics, it brought forth a new set of problems. I find myself needing more support, I told Everett, my voice wavering slightly. It seems like I'm the sole advocate for my beliefs while you remain passive. He sighed. I understand that my parents can be bothersome, but it's part of the grandparents' role to engage in such behavior. I shook my head. You seem hesitant to confront them, claiming it's not true. But deep down, you're afraid to confront your parents for our family's well-being. Everett frowned. You're being delusional. The truth is, you're afraid. What if I occasionally agree with them? Sometimes they do go overboard with screen time, but we both agreed before having kids to limit it, even considering eliminating TVs and accessible devices. Now it seems that's all they use, I shot back, frustration rising. If you feel they have too much screen time, 5 times a week, totaling 9 hours, why don't you communicate with me about it? Everett's gaze faltered as I continued. Why is it that even though they have their dad in their lives, you're absent? I'm here. I do things. I pay the bills and play with them sometimes, my husband replied. But being a parent is more than just financial contributions, Everett, I retorted. If I had known this was your expectation, I added, my voice quieter now, I might have reconsidered having children with you. Everett opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. It's about remembering birthdays and sports events, reading them stories before bed, and caring for them when they're sick or upset. Things you consistently forget and neglect. He clenched his jaw. I know I'm a good father, but your selfishness prevents you from recognizing that, he snapped. I shook my head. Our disagreements have been ongoing, and it's evident we struggle to see eye to eye. You persist in disrespecting me in our home, I insisted. Tension lingered between us after this argument, only intensifying with subsequent events. I became increasingly fatigued by persistent belittling and micromanaging, behaviors that inevitably push individuals to their limits. One afternoon, I reached a breaking point when Madison and Ted unexpectedly visited, taking the opportunity to criticize my parenting and mothering skills. Sweetheart, are you certain the kids should be playing outside at this time? Madison asked, her voice laced with concern. They might get sunburned. It's quite hot. They have sunscreen, Madison, I replied, trying to stay calm. And it's just for a brief period, around 30 minutes, before their evening activities. Madison frowned. I just don't understand why you always seem so relaxed about these things. Don't you worry about their safety? She said indignantly. I took a deep breath. I appreciate the concern, but I have everything under control. If I require advice, I'll seek it out. Ted, standing behind Madison, chimed in. We're just trying to offer assistance, Peggy. I understand that, I responded, feeling the weight of their judgment, but it's a boundary I've communicated before. It's not about the help, it's about how it's delivered. Madison's tone turned defensive. Of course we're offended. How can you treat us like this? We came over because we missed you and the kids, and this is how you speak to us. No, I said firmly. You came here because you were bored and wanted to belittle and micromanage my parenting skills. Madison gasped. What? That's absurd. Did you hit your head or something? How could you even think that? Ted added, wait until Everett returns home from work. You'll regret speaking to us in such a manner. We're only trying to assist you. I shook my head, feeling the weight of their misunderstanding. I take pride in my role as a mother, and it's disheartening that you fail to acknowledge my efforts. Both of you are speaking from a place of privilege. You only became parents to Everett when he was 15, never having experienced the challenges of raising children under the age of 15. They both stared at me in silence as I continued. Jenny and Tristan, at 11 and 12, present their own set of difficulties. Therefore, I don't believe either of you is qualified to dictate how I should effectively parent. Despite my firm stance, I knew the issue was far from resolved. This conversation had merely opened up old wounds. Self-righteous individuals always find something to criticize, even when it lacks substance. The argument persisted. Ted, with a sneer, said, well, this behavior is unprecedented. What is wrong with you? Have you no shame or respect? Were you raised in a barn? Apologize to us this instant. Contrary to their expectations, I adhered to the belief that apologies should only be given when genuinely warranted. Unfortunately for both of you, I replied, I feel no remorse for my words because they were undeniably true. I looked at them directly and added, you may be further surprised to learn that I instilled these same principles in Jenny and Tristan. Their gasps resembled a scene from a soap opera. Do you believe you're smarter or wiser than us? Madison challenged. We're older and we know what's best. Ted chimed in. Let me call Everett right now. Go ahead and call him, I shot back. I don't care if it's 3 against 1. I know I'm right. You seem incapable of admitting your faults, Madison accused. It won't harm you to say, I was wrong, Peggy, and I'm sorry. I stood my ground. Apologize to you? For what? For being terrible grandparents and in-laws? Absurd. Ted raised his voice. If you think this is absurd, just wait and see. As I exited the room to collect my emotions, I couldn't help but contemplate the situation. I realized that mere words wouldn't convince them to step down from their high horse. They needed a tangible experience to bring them back to reality. As I anxiously paced, keeping an eye on my children through the window, it suddenly struck me. I swiftly returned to the dining table, where Madison and Ted appeared, ready to depart. Where do you think you're headed, both of you? I inquired. Home, perhaps? It seems our guidance and assistance have fallen on deaf ears. Therefore, we've chosen to relocate our privilege elsewhere, Madison muttered. Thank you, I said calmly, but then continued. Oh no, you two aren't making a move. You're staying right here. I'll step back and let you assume the parental roles you've neglected but are now eager to instill in Jenny and Tristan. What? Madison stammered, her eyes widening in shock. Maybe it's high time I embrace civility, I added sarcastically, considering my barn upbringing. I didn't mean that, Peggy, Ted interrupted, looking flustered. We were just caught up in the heat of the moment, I smirked. So it seems you're ready to embrace refined manners now. Please make yourselves at home and take on the role of the exemplary grandparents for your grandchildren. Madison looked panicked. But we're without our clothes and toiletries. No need to fret, I assured them. I'll give Everett a call and have him drop by your place. He can bring your belongings if necessary. You can also pick up toiletries at the grocery store. Let's head there now and we can bring the kids along, demonstrating how well-behaved and angelic they can be in grocery stores. All of that won't be necessary, Ted mumbled, but I ignored him. Come on, kids. We're going to the store. Upon hearing the word store, Jenny and Tristan eagerly darted inside, covered in dirt and dust, their smiles spreading from ear to ear. Any mother could discern that behind those smiles lay a mischievous plan to wreak havoc in the store. Unfortunately for Madison and Ted, they remained unaware of what awaited them. As we arrived at the store, I decided to declare, Jenny and Tristan, Grandma and Grandpa are going to play a game with you, okay? They will assume the roles of your parents temporarily. Right now, I need you to accompany them inside the store and act as if they are your actual parents. The children eagerly nodded, anticipating the promised chaos and excitement, and hurried into the store. Madison hesitated. Are you sure about this? She asked. Oh, I'm positive, I replied confidently. Go ahead, pick out what you need. Everett should be home soon, and everything will be ready for a delightful evening of parenting during your sleepover. Okay, whatever. Tristan shrugged dismissively. Madison, considering it just a trip to the grocery store, commented, How hard could it be? However, what was supposed to be a quick task ended up taking nearly an hour. The kids emerged from the store laden with snacks and toys, while Madison and Ted, trailing behind, looked visibly fatigued, as if they had aged 25 years. I chuckled to myself at the scene. What happened, guys? Why all the toys? I inquired. They wouldn't stop screaming for them, causing a scene, so we had to give in and get them whatever they wanted just to make them quiet, Madison explained, looking defeated. You get used to that. But where are your things? I asked, noticing they hadn't bought anything for themselves. Oh shoot, we forgot those. We were so overwhelmed with the kids that we completely forgot, Madison admitted. Huh, interesting. I'll go back and get the necessary items. Please keep them entertained, Ted said, excusing himself. Ted managed to retrieve the needed toiletries, and we finally made our way home. Everett greeted us with a worried expression. Why are my parents staying the night? He questioned. Jenny, Tristan, go play with your toys and get ready for bath time while Mommy talks to your new parents. You'll be getting an extra parent tonight, I announced to the excited kids. Yes, my baby's daddy is finally going to help you with the things that Mommy normally does, I explained to the children, who looked thrilled. But their new parents appeared noticeably concerned. What's going on, Peggy? Everett asked. If you really must know, I began. I've decided to entrust the role of the present and caring parent to you three for the next 24 hours. During this time, your task is to demonstrate that you are the superior parents. If successful, I commit to following all of your advice unquestioningly. Additionally, I pledge to cater to your every whim and pamper you at least once a week, upon request, without any inquiries. The opportunity to be pampered whenever desired is on the table, I concluded. Now, Everett, before we proceed, let's discuss this for a moment, Madison interjected, clearly uneasy. Oh, come on, Madison, Ted urged. Are you still affected by the incident at the store earlier? It was just a fluke, a momentary lapse. We can handle this. After all, it's 3 against 1, and success is inevitable. I smiled at their optimism. I appreciate your enthusiasm for the challenge, but I want to make it clear that if you fail, the tables will turn, and you three will be responsible for pampering and spoiling me, all while refraining from commenting on my parenting. Deal? I suggested. Despite their confidence, the task proved far from easy. In less than 20 minutes, Madison and Ted found themselves screaming as Jenny and Tristan terrorized them. The grandparents' attempts to assist with bath time were futile, leaving Everett to step in and manage with less than stellar results, wiping down the kids with baby wipes and haphazardly dressing them in pajamas. With the tasks completed, Madison sighed and asked, "Can we rest now?" Only to be informed by me, "Rest? You've only just begun. Parenting doesn't stop after bath time." They were now tasked with entertaining the children with educational content, preparing dinner, feeding the kids, helping with homework, playing with them, reading bedtime stories, and managing their morning routine. The trio attempted to divide the responsibilities, with Ted deciding to serve a fancy dinner filled with flavors unfamiliar to the children. He said confidently, "They'll love this. A bit of sophistication never hurt anyone. Who would have thought that serving kids a salad with olives and feta cheese would be a recipe for disaster?" Ted, of course. The kids, unsurprisingly, detested the concoction. Jenny crossed her arms and declared, "I'm not eating this," while Tristan, being a toddler, expressed his displeasure with a full-blown meltdown, wailing uncontrollably. The new parents were in a state of panic. Ted, baffled, mumbled, "I thought they'd appreciate something different." Meanwhile, I calmly sipped on my chamomile tea, watching the chaos unfold. Eventually, Ted gave in to the kids' demands, throwing up his hands and saying, "Fine, pizza it is." Next up was Madison, who had considerable difficulty with her tasks. She looked defeated, muttering, "I'm too tired for this." And instead of teaching the kids how to do their homework, she simply completed it for them. Everett wasn't any better. His idea of playing with the kids involved plopping them in front of the TV and iPad. "It's just easier this way," he said, ignoring the strict rule of no more than 9 hours of screen time per week. "They've already gone over their limit," I reminded him, but he shrugged and replied, "What's a little extra screen time? It's not going to hurt." As bedtime approached, Everett struggled to get his hyperactive children to settle down. "Come on, guys, it's time for bed," he pleaded, but the kids weren't having it. It took him 5 hours to finally put them to sleep. When he was done, he dragged himself to our bedroom, collapsed on the bed, and groaned, "I don't know how you do this every day." Little did Everett, Madison, and Ted know, a surprise awaited them in the morning. My kids are early birds, waking up by 5 a.m. They decided to make their morning wake-up routine a bit livelier by banging pots and pans. The loud clatter jolted them awake, and Everett shot up, alarmed. "What's happening? Is something wrong?" Madison rubbed her eyes and muttered, "Is there a fire?" Ted, still half asleep, grumbled, "What time is it?" "It's 5:30, I answered, "and this is how my kids wake us up every morning." A little fact we forgot to mention. Everett, who had grown used to sleeping through the noise, simply covered his head with a pillow, muttering, "I thought we were done with this." Madison took the initiative and nudged Ted. "Come on, we have to get up," she said. "There's a whole day ahead of us." Leading the group, I explained, "First, the children need to be guided into a morning meditation. Good luck with Tristan. He hates this." Ted groaned. "Why meditation? Can't we just skip it?" But I reminded him, "No skipping. If you want that snack later, Tristan needs to behave." Afterward, they managed to get the kids to eat a healthy snack and bathe them. Everett, visibly weary, looked at me. "Is there anything else?" I nodded. "You need to prepare breakfast, take them to the park, and then help them bake cookies for school. After that it's lunch, room cleanup, and the living room needs tidying too." It was at this point that Ted, utterly overwhelmed, threw his hands up. I admit it, I was wrong about how easy this would be. Madison, rubbing her temples, added, "I want to quit." But I firmly reminded them, parenting doesn't work like that, and looked at them with a smirk. "Remember how you criticized my parenting? It doesn't seem so easy now, does it?" I added. The trio fell silent, defeated. We've barely made it through 20 hours, and I'm exhausted, Madison whispered to Everett, who nodded in agreement. By the end of the day, all three were too tired to argue. All right, Peggy, Everett said. You win. We give up. Ted and Madison, equally worn out, chimed in. We're sorry. And with that, they reluctantly admitted defeat and spent the entire weekend pampering me, while I reveled in a sense of sweet revenge and satisfaction.